History remembers the Gallic Wars as Julius Caesar's masterpiece, a textbook campaign that brought a vast territory under Roman control. But that's the victor's version. The reality is far more complex and far more fragile. Rome came closer to losing Gaul than its history's ever admitted. This isn't just a story about Caesar's conquest, it's about why Rome didn't lose everything in a single, disastrous season. By the middle of the 1st century BCE, Rome believed Gaul was already won. Legions were stationed deep inland, and the maps in the Senate looked secure. After nearly a decade of war, victory felt like a routine. The legions had marched through Gaul, crossed impassable rivers, and defeated tribes whose names never even reached Rome. The Roman strategy was simple and effective: divide the enemy, isolate resistance, apply overwhelming force, and move on. Gaul wasn't a single nation. It was a complex mosaic of dozens of tribes, hundreds of local leaders, and shifting alliances. This fragmentation was Rome's greatest advantage. For years, the system worked like clockwork. A rebellion would flare up, a legion would respond, a decisive battle would be fought, and the survivors would submit. But beneath this predictable pattern, immense pressure was building. The Roman legions were thousands of miles from Italy. Their supply lines stretched across hostile forests and rivers. Their winter camps were exposed, and most importantly, Rome was overstaying its welcome. This wasn't just a military operation, it was an occupation. Every Roman demand for grain strained local survival. Every winter tax deepened the resentment. Slowly, the Gallic tribes started to learn. They watched how Roman columns moved. They studied how Roman camps were built. They noticed when legions split their forces. And then, something fundamental changed. Instead of isolated revolts, coordinated action began to appear. Instead of heroic last stands, there were strategic withdrawals. The tribes weren't just fighting out of pride anymore. They were united by a shared fear, not a fear of Rome's strength, but a fear of its permanence. Gaul didn't want to defeat Rome. It wanted Rome to leave, and that distinction would change everything. The Roman war machine was designed to crush armies in open battle. It was far less prepared to suppress an entire region that was quietly, patiently refusing to cooperate. In 52 BCE, the pattern finally broke. The Great Uprising didn't start with a surprise attack on a legion. It started with a decision by Gallic leaders to stop fighting Rome on Roman terms. At the center of this new strategy was a young Arvanian noble named Vercingetorix. He wasn't the most powerful leader in Gaul, nor did he command the largest tribe, but he understood something crucial that others had missed. Rome's greatest strength was also its greatest vulnerability. The legions were unbeatable in a fair fight. Their discipline and training were unmatched. So, Vercingetorix decided he wouldn't give them that fight. He proposed a scorched earth strategy that went against every Gallic tradition. No more heroic charges, no more defending every village to the last man. Instead, they would deny the Romans everything. Crops would be burned, settlements abandoned, supplies destroyed. If Rome couldn't be beaten in battle, it would be starved into retreat. This was a radical, almost unthinkable idea. For Gallic society, land was identity. Burning your own fields felt like a surrender. But Vercingetorix argued that survival required sacrifice. He convinced them that Rome's discipline could only be matched by their own restraint, and remarkably, the tribes listened. This was the moment Rome nearly lost Gaul. Not on a battlefield, but in its logistical columns. As Caesar's legions advanced, they found empty land. Granaries were smoldering ruins. Villages were eerily silent. For the first time, the legions began to feel the vast, unforgiving distance from Italy. Foraging parties were ambushed. Supply convoys were constantly harassed. This was not how Rome fought wars. The system was built on speed and decisive action. Now it was being forced into a slow, grinding war of attrition. Caesar, a brilliant commander, adapted quickly. He split his forces to secure supplies and moved with lightning speed, striking fortified towns before they could be evacuated. But every move was a risk. The deeper his legions pushed into Gaul, the more exposed they became. They were winning battles, but the war itself was slipping from their grasp. The turning point came at a place called Alesia. Alesia was a fortified town perched on a high plateau, a natural fortress. When Vercingetorix withdrew his forces there, he was making a calculated gamble. He would let Caesar come to him, forcing the Roman general to choose, risk a costly assault, or retreat in disgrace. A retreat would have validated the entire Gallic strategy and likely inspired an even wider rebellion. Caesar chose to stay, and what followed was one of the most extraordinary feats of engineering in ancient history. Instead of attacking the fortress, Caesar laid siege. But this was no ordinary siege. He knew a massive Gallic relief army would be coming, so he ordered his men to build two enormous walls of fortification. One wall facing inward to trap Vercingetorix inside Alesia, and a second, even longer wall facing outward to defend against the coming relief force. We're talking about miles of trenches, ramparts, and watchtowers, all built by soldiers under constant threat of attack. This wasn't about individual heroism. It was about industrial-scale organization. The Roman system was now facing the Gallic system in a direct contest of endurance. Inside Alesia, supplies ran perilously low. Outside, the Gallic relief army, said to number in the hundreds of thousands, finally arrived. They threw themselves against the outer Roman walls. The besieged forces inside Alesia attacked the inner walls at the same time. For days, the entire campaign hung in the balance. Roman soldiers fought without sleep, their lines stretched to the breaking point. Gallic warriors charged again and again, knowing that their kinsmen inside were starving. At several points, the Roman line nearly collapsed. Sections were overrun. Commanders desperately improvised, shifting reserves to plug the gaps. Caesar himself rode along the lines, not as a glorious hero, but as a crisis manager, redirecting units and holding the line together. And the Romans held, not just because of courage, but because their system was designed to absorb this kind of pressure. When the massive Gallic relief force finally broke and withdrew, the fate of Alesia was sealed. Vercingetorix surrendered, presenting himself to Caesar to save his people. The Great Gallic Rebellion was broken. Rome's victory was not clean or decisive. The legions were exhausted, their supplies were dangerously thin, and smaller rebellions would continue for years. But the strategic threat was over. The Gallic strategy required unity and patience, and the defeat at Alesia broke both. Tribes began making their own separate deals with Rome, choosing survival over solidarity. So, what really saved Rome in Gaul? It wasn't just Caesar's genius, it was the resilience of the Roman system itself, its ability to build, supply, and command under unimaginable pressure. It was the discipline that allowed it to endure a grueling siege rather than chase a quick, glorious battle. The near loss of Gaul fundamentally reshaped Roman military thinking. Future campaigns would emphasize logistics over speed and control over conquest. Gaul became a province, and eventually, a core part of the Roman Empire. But Rome never forgot how close it came to disaster. It learned that domination is fragile, and that even the most powerful systems can be challenged in unexpected ways. The Gallic Wars weren't just about expansion, they were about adaptation. Rome didn't win because it was invincible. It won because when its assumptions failed, its structure held. History loves to remember the larger-than-life victor, but sometimes the most important lesson is found in how close they came to defeat. Thanks for watching. If you want to uncover more moments where history was decided on a knife's edge, make sure you subscribe and let me know in the comments which story we should explore next.